On a bright morning at Paris Island, a quiet janitor stood in the back row, watching his twin daughters become United States Marines. He expected nothing more than pride, a few tears, and a memory he'd carry forever. But everything changed the moment a USMC captain grabbed his arm and caught sight of a tattoo that should not have existed. A tattoo known only to Marines who survived the darkest streets of Fallujah. What happened next left the entire parade deck silent and revealed a truth no one was prepared for before we begin this unforgettable story of courage, humility, and the quiet strength of a single father. If you enjoy meaningful, heartwarming stories like this, consider subscribing to our channel. It helps us bring you more inspiring moments, more human stories, and more reminders that kindness still matters. Now, let's begin. The morning sun over Paris Island had a way of softening even the hardest edges of the Marine Corps recruit depot. It slid across the immaculate parade deck, glinting off brass buttons and polished dress blues, casting long shadows behind the rows of recruits standing perfectly aligned for graduation day. Families pressed along the ropes, a sea of proud parents, grandparents, siblings, each searching eagerly for the face they loved. And then, quietly, almost imperceptibly, Brandon Tate stepped into that sea of anticipation. He moved with the calm patience of a man who was used to being unseen. His olive green work shirt was neatly pressed, sleeves rolled just above the elbow, revealing arms tanned by years of manual labor. His long chestnut hair brushed past his shoulders, tied loosely behind his neck, giving him the quiet look of someone who never asked for attention, but somehow drew it anyway. To anyone glancing at him, Brandon looked like a laborer, maybe a mechanic, certainly not someone who belonged near the parade deck on a day reserved for ceremony and precision. But to Emma and Ella, the twins trotting excitedly beside him, he was the whole world. "Daddy, look," Emma whispered, tugging at his sleeve as she pointed toward the distant formation of new Marines. They already lined up. "Do you think we're late?" Brandon knelt so he could be eye to eye with her. "Sweetheart," he said, gently smoothing a loose curl from her forehead. "Your old man could show up a day late, and they'd still let us in. They can't graduate without letting their biggest fans watch." Ella giggled. "We're the biggest, he repeated, tapping each of their noses as he stood again. To anyone watching, they looked like a small, ordinary family, wrapped in an extraordinary moment. But Brandon carried himself with the kind of quiet reserve that made people hesitate before getting too close, as if there was something about him they sensed, but couldn't name. He didn't mind. In fact, he preferred it that way. Today wasn't about him. Today it was about them, his girls. He kept a respectful distance from the uniformed officers guiding the twins along the perimeter. The last thing he wanted was to draw unnecessary attention. A janitor didn't exactly belong in the central seating, and he knew it. He'd spent half his life living outside the spotlight. There was no reason to change now. But still, something stirred in him when he looked out across the parade deck. Pride. Deep, unshakable pride. He had raised the girls alone since they were barely 8 months old. He had changed diapers while half asleep, after night shifts, learned to braid hair by practicing on old thrift store dolls, and made pancakes shaped like smiley faces every Saturday morning without fail. And now, after years of scraped knees, school recitals, and late-night study sessions, his daughters stood on the brink of their own Marine chapter. His heart swelled just thinking of it. The crowd thickened as families leaned over each other for a better view. Children climbed onto shoulders. Old veterans shifted onto canes or walkers, adjusting faded ball caps, marked with unit patches from wars long past. There was laughter, excitement, tears waiting for permission to fall. Brandon stayed quiet at the edge of it all. His instinct, old, ingrained, and unbreakable, was always to observe from just outside the circle, to make sure everyone was safe, to watch for danger even where none existed. But today he tried to soften that instinct. Today was supposed to be normal. Then again, normal was something the world rarely allowed him. "Daddy, can we go closer?" Ella asked, eyes sparkling. "Closer?" Brandon raised a brow playfully. "I thought you wanted to stay where we can see everything." "We want to see them," Emma said, bouncing on her toes. "We want to see the new Marines before they march," Brandon chuckled quietly. "All right. But stay close, okay?" The girls each grabbed one of his hands, and together they wove deeper into the crowd. Brandon chose a path along the side walkway, quieter, less visible as always. But even as he moved, he felt a pair of eyes prickling the back of his neck. Someone was watching him, not the curious glance of another parent, not the wandering eyes of a civilian. Something sharper, more assessing. He turned just slightly without appearing alarmed, and noticed a young female officer standing near the restricted entry gate. Her uniform was immaculate forest green service coat, gold buttons, aligned with mathematical precision ribbons, shining in the morning sun. A white barracks cover sat perfectly centered atop her dark hair. Captain Brooke Evans. She was surveying the crowd with the crisp vigilance expected of a Marine officer on duty. But when her eyes reached Brandon, they didn't pass over him the way everyone else's did. They snapped, locked, followed. He felt it. Brandon looked forward again, immediately guiding his daughters calmly toward the family seating. His pulse didn't spike, his breath didn't hitch. He had mastered the art of appearing unbothered, even when every instinct told him he had been marked. Old reflexes whispered, "Someone noticed you. Stay calm, don't draw attention." But he wasn't here to hide, not today. Emma squeezed his hand. "Daddy, you okay?" He softened instantly. "Yeah, sweetheart. Just making sure we find the perfect spot." Behind them, still at the gate, Captain Evans narrowed her eyes. She'd seen something about the man, something that didn't fit. A civilian. A janitor, judging by the shirt. But the way he moved, the calm, the awareness, the way his eyes swept the field without even turning his head. She couldn't shake the feeling. Her duty was simple: keep the command area secure on graduation day. And something about the long-haired man in civilian clothes walking toward restricted seating didn't sit right. So she stepped away from the gate, straight toward Brandon, completely unaware that one small misunderstanding was about to unravel into a moment the entire base, indeed, the entire Corps would never forget. The atmosphere on the parade deck hummed with pride and ceremony, but Captain Brooke Evans felt none of the warmth washing through the crowd. Her posture was straight as an iron rod, her eyes sharp beneath the brim of her white barracks cover. She had been assigned perimeter oversight for the graduation ceremony, a duty she took with almost religious seriousness. Nothing slipped past her. Nothing should slip past her. That's why the long-haired man in the olive work shirt had unsettled her instincts. He didn't look threatening. But something in the precise way he scanned the surroundings felt off. Most civilians looked at the Marines, at the buildings, at the spectacle. This man glanced at choke points, exits, vantage points, a habit of someone trained to see danger long before it arrived. Yet he wore no uniform, no lanyard, no visitor badge. And he had drifted dangerously close to the walkway, normally reserved for officers and high-ranking guests. Brooke's jaw tightened. Better safe than sorry. She stepped briskly through the crowd, weaving between families and folding chairs, her boots landing in crisp, controlled steps. The closer she approached, the more she studied him. The long hair, the soft voice he used with the girls, the worn-down shirt with faded stitching at the pocket. He looked like a blue-collar father doing his best. But that feeling in her chest wouldn't let go. A Marine captain's instincts rarely lied. "Excuse me, sir." Brooke called out, voice firm but not hostile. Brandon stopped instantly, almost too instantly. His reaction was calm, smooth, as though he had anticipated someone calling out to him. He glanced down at Emma and Ella. "It's all right," he murmured to them. "Stay right here, holding Daddy's hands." Both girls nodded obediently. Brooke approached, noting how the man stepped in front of his daughters, not aggressively, but protectively, creating a silent barrier she couldn't ignore. "Sir," she repeated, stopping 3 paces away. "May I see your identification?" Brandon kept his voice gentle. "Is there a problem, ma'am?" "You're entering a controlled zone," Brooke replied. "And you're not wearing a visitor badge. I need to confirm your authorization to be here." Families nearby turned, slightly sensing tension. The twins shrank in closer to their father. Brandon exhaled softly. Of course. He reached into his back pocket with very slow, very deliberate movements, the kind men use around police officers or nervous security guards. He pulled out his wallet and handed over his ID. Brooke accepted it, examining it longer than necessary. The license was clean. Local address. Name Brandon Tate. Everything normal. But her suspicion remained. "You work here?" she asked, her eyes glancing back at his shirt. "Just maintenance," Brandon said. "Mostly night shifts. I'm here for my daughter's graduation." Emma lifted her chin proudly. "We're Marines today. Well, almost." Brooke's expression softened for half a second, almost imperceptibly, before duty hardened it again. "Mr. Tate night shift personnel do not typically have access during graduation hours," Brandon nodded. "I came through the public gate." "Which does not lead to this walkway," Brooke countered sharply. Brandon didn't defend himself. I must have taken a wrong turn. Which only made Brooke more suspicious. He wasn't defensive. He wasn't annoyed. He wasn't even confused. He was calm. Too calm. No civilian under pressure ever reacted this way. "Sir, for security reasons, I'm going to need you to stay here while I verify your access." Emma and Ella exchanged worried looks. Captain Brandon asked gently, "My girls have waited years for this moment. I'm just trying to get them a clear view." Brooke crossed her arms. "Then you should have followed the designated route." "I'm not trying to make things difficult, sir, but you're in a place you shouldn't be." A small crowd had begun to observe now. Brandon felt their stares, some curious, some judgmental. He already knew how it looked, a father in a cheap shirt being questioned like a trespasser. He'd been through worse, but not in front of the girls. He wanted to de-escalate. "Captain," he said quietly, "if you'll allow me to step back 10 feet and stand with the rest of the families, I'll do that." "No trouble," Brooke shook her head. "Not until I clear your credentials." "Is that really necessary?" Emma asked, her voice trembling. "He didn't do anything wrong." Brooke kept her face neutral. "Miss, this is for your safety, too." Ella's eyes welled up. "Please don't take Daddy away." The words struck something deep in Brandon. A memory, fleeting but sharp, of 2 infants crying as he was taken to a medevac helicopter years ago. The girls didn't remember, but he did. He forced his voice steady. "Girls." "I'm okay. Just breathe." Brooke hesitated again. Part of her hated this. She wasn't heartless. She just believed in order, structure, procedure. And this man simply didn't fit where he stood. Her mind replayed his posture, his awareness, the way his eyes quietly anticipated her arrival. This wasn't just a janitor who wandered the wrong way. "Mr. Tate," she said, "raise your left arm for me." Brandon blinked. "My left. Arm for officer safety. I need to make sure you're not carrying anything concealed." Now the families fully turned. Whispers started. Good ones rarely did in situations like this. Brandon swallowed a sigh. Slowly, very slowly, He lifted his left arm, and that was when Brooke saw it. Just a flash beneath the rolled sleeve. Ink. Colors. The edge of something coiled. A tattoo. But not any tattoo. Brooke stepped closer, eyes narrowing. "What is that?" she demanded. Brandon tried to roll his sleeve back down. "Ma'am, show me the rest." Her voice was sharp, commanding, unyielding. Brandon looked at his daughters, two scared faces he hated having to reassure. He knelt in front of them briefly. "It's all right," he whispered. "I'll explain later." Then he stood, resigned, and rolled his sleeve higher. The tattoo revealed itself fully. A green serpent coiled around a K-bar knife, fangs bared blade downward, etched with small script beneath it. Fallujah 0 Brooke froze. Something hot and electric shot through her spine. She didn't recognize the exact meaning, but every instinct she possessed screamed that this was not a decorative tattoo. Not a biker emblem. Not a vanity symbol. This was military. Elite. And terrifying in the way only truth could be. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. For the first time that morning, Captain Brooke Evans felt uncertain. And somewhere across the parade deck, a pair of older, more experienced eyes, those of Gunnery Sergeant Ethan Bowen, had locked onto the same tattoo. He wasn't just frozen. He looked like he'd seen a ghost. A hush, thin but unmistakable, seemed to ripple across the nearby families as the tattoo came fully into view. The serpent, the K-bar, the inscription Fallujah 05. Even without knowing its meaning, people felt the tension in the air sharpen. Captain Brooke Evans felt it too, though she masked it behind a hard stare. She had seen Marines with combat tattoos, unit numbers, eagles, anchors, even personal mottos. But this was different. The ink looked old, worn, almost carved into the man rather than drawn. And the way he revealed it, not defensively, not proudly, just with quiet acceptance, as if he expected this reaction. Yet her training pressed relentlessly on her mind. She had a duty. Her reputation for discipline, fairness, and unshakable adherence to regulations had carved her place as one of the youngest captains in her unit. She couldn't falter now, not even in front of children. "Mr. Tate," Brooke said carefully, "that tattoo, where did you get it?" Brandon looked at her evenly. His expression was gentle, but closed off a door only he knew how to lock. "That's personal, Captain." Her jaw tightened. "I'm asking as part of a security assessment." "It's still personal," Brandon replied softly. The twins clung to him, unwilling to let go of his hands. People nearby leaned closer like spectators at a street corner, deciding whether a confrontation would escalate or fade. Brooke felt heat rise beneath her uniform collar. She didn't like feeling unsure. She didn't like having a man refuse a direct question, and she especially didn't like the crowd forming around them. "Sir," she said, voice harder now, "if you refuse to answer, I will have no choice but to detain you until military police arrive." Ella gasped. Emma's eyes welled instantly. Brandon took a deep breath, steady and unshaken. "I don't want trouble," he said. "And I don't want my daughters frightened. We're just trying to watch a ceremony." Brooke's stance remained firm. Then cooperate. Families shifted farther away, giving the scene space that felt too much like a spotlight. A father being cornered, a captain growing frustrated, an audience waiting to judge. Brandon hated it. Not for himself, he could withstand humiliation without flinching. But for Emma and Ella, this was the last memory he wanted attached to their graduation. He gently guided the girls behind him, shielding them from Brooke's piercing gaze. "Captain Evans," he said quietly, "I'll walk back to the public seating. I'll keep my distance. You won't have any more concerns." "That's not how this works," she snapped. "You can't just walk away." Her voice rose slightly, just enough for a few Marines nearby to turn their heads. Brandon kept his tone level. "I don't want this to escalate. You don't get to decide that." Emma's small voice slipped out between tremors. "Daddy, why's she mad?" Brandon closed his eyes for a moment, letting the air steady him. "She's not mad," he whispered. "She's doing her job, even when it's hard." Emma pressed her face into his side. Ella clung tighter. Brooke felt a strange twist in her chest. Not guilt exactly, but something she couldn't name. She did not enjoy scaring children. She had joined the Corps to protect people, not intimidate families. Yet the odd unease this man stirred in her kept overriding her instincts, pushing her forward with sharp edges instead of soft hands. "Sir," she repeated, "step away from the restricted pathway and remain where I can see you. I'll call for MP to verify your clearance." He nodded. "Understood." But as he began to step back, Brooke reached out her hand, landing on his forearm. It was meant to be a simple gesture of control, reinforcement of command. Instead, it ignited the second shock of the morning. The moment her fingers touched him, Brandon instinctively tensed, not violently, but with a sudden readiness that only someone trained for combat possessed. Brooke felt it instantly, the muscle tightening, the instinctive pivot of weight, a shift in balance that screamed warrior, not janitor. Her pulse quickened. Then his sleeve slid further up from the contact, revealing more ink, a faint scar, a faint number. Symbols etched in ways she didn't recognize, but knew carried history she had no right to touch. "What is that?" she whispered, her voice nearly cracking. Brandon gently removed her hand from his arm. "Captain, please. I'm not here to cause problems." But the tremor in her breath betrayed her confusion. This man wasn't what she thought he was, and that terrified her more than the possibility that he was a threat. "Sir, stand still," she ordered, though her voice lacked the steel it held just minutes earlier. "I'll need to examine." A deep voice suddenly cut through the tension. Captain Evans, a tall Marine sergeant, hurried over, his face tense. Families parted to let him through. He leaned close to Brooke and whispered urgently, "Ma'am, Gunny Bowen is requesting you step aside. He says not to engage with the civilian further." Brooke stiffened. What were the sergeant swallowed. He didn't explain, ma'am. But he looked shaken. Shaken Gunnery Sergeant Ethan Bowen, the most unflappable Marine she knew, shaken. Brooke looked back at Brandon. He stood quietly in place, hands visible daughters behind him. No threat, no aggression, nothing. Yet every part of her training screamed that she was standing on the edge of something she did not understand. "I'm not stepping away," Brooke muttered. "Not until I know who this man is." As she took a breath to continue, her radio crackled sharp and unexpected. "Captain Evans, this is Sergeant Major Brooks. Hold your position. Do not detain the civilian. Colonel Irwin is en route." Brooke's heart slammed against her ribs. The colonel. Coming here for a janitor without a badge. She turned completely toward Brandon, now studying him as if for the first time. No, not a janitor. Not just a father. There was something ancient in his eyes, pain, strength, restraint, and a depth she had only ever seen in battle-scarred Marines twice his age. "What are you?" she whispered under her breath. Brandon simply lifted his hands in a gesture of quiet surrender, not to her authority but to the moment. A man who had already lived through storms she could not imagine. Around them, the graduation band began tuning instruments, oblivious to the unfolding shift. But Captain Brooke Evans suddenly felt as if the entire parade deck was tilting beneath her feet, and somewhere behind the bleachers, unseen by most, Gunnery Sergeant Ethan Bowen jogged toward the command post, breath-ragged voice, tight. "Sergeant Major, that's him. That's Reaper 6. I'd stake my life on it. The parade deck, normally a place of immaculate order and ceremonial pride, felt suddenly fragile, as though one wrong word might shatter the entire morning. The distant murmur of families, the soft clatter of dress shoes, even the warm hum of the rising sun seemed to pause around the small circle of tension. Captain Brooke Evans tried to steady her breath. She was trained for chaos. She had commanded fire teams in night drills, responded to security breaches, and stood firm through hurricanes battering the Carolina coast. But this quiet man, with the calm eyes, unsettled her in ways she could not justify. She didn't know whether to see him as a threat or a mystery, and she hated mysteries. Mr. Tate Brooke repeated, struggling to reclaim her authoritative tone. "I need you to stay exactly where you are." Brandon didn't move. "I'm not going anywhere." Emma and Ella huddled behind him, small fingers gripping the fabric of his shirt. Their fear was unmistakable, and Brooke felt a pinch of guilt. But she pushed it down, duty first, clarity later. The radio clipped to her belt hissed again. Sergeant Major Brooke's voice, crisp and commanding Captain Evans, refrained from further action. "Colonel Irwin will arrive shortly." She swallowed hard. When a colonel moved because of a civilian, no, because of a man with a tattoo, it meant something was unfolding far above her pay grade. But she didn't know what. So she did the only thing she could keep control until she had answers. She stepped closer. "Sir, please extend your arms. I need to confirm you are not carrying." Her hand brushed his forearm again, and everything changed. A shock, not physical, but intuitive, snapped through her. It was the way his muscles tightened. Precise, measured the reflex of a man who had been trained to react instantly and lethally, but was restraining himself with immense discipline. No janitor carried that posture. No civilian had that level of control. Brooke's breath hitched. What is this tattoo?" Brandon looked at her eyes steady, almost sad. "A piece of my past." "Captain, that's all." Brooke shook her head. "No, that's not just a tattoo. I've worked with Marines my entire adult life. I've seen every kind of ink unit pride, personal reminders, tributes. But this is something I've never seen." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "And it scares me that I don't know why." Brandon gently lowered his arm, covering part of the serpent with his sleeve. "Some things aren't meant to be talked about." "That's not your choice," Brooke snapped more harshly than intended. He didn't react with anger, just quiet acceptance. And somehow, that calmness frightened her more than any confrontation would have. Behind her, whispers grew louder. "Who is he? Is he dangerous? What's on his arm? Is he being arrested?" Emma trembled. "Daddy, please don't let them take you." "I'm right here," Brandon murmured. "Nothing's happening to me." But Brooke sensed pain in his voice, deep, heavy old pain he carried like a scar beneath his skin. Pain only a veteran carried. For one brief moment she considered softening, letting him go, ignoring the gnawing feeling that something enormous lingered beneath the surface. But protocol kept her spine straight. "Sir," she said firmly, "until a higher-ranking officer confirms your credentials, you cannot move from this spot." Brandon nodded. "I understand." He always understood. Always calm. Always controlled. That bothered her more than anything. Then, a voice pierced the air. "Captain Evans, step back." Brooke turned to see Gunnery Sergeant Ethan Bowen striding toward them, his weathered face pale beneath the brim of his cover. She had never seen him move like that urgently, almost desperately. "Gunny," she said, startled. "What's wrong?" Ethan didn't answer her. He looked straight at Brandon and froze. His mouth parted. His breath stopped. His hands that had treated battlefield wounds without flinching, began to tremble. "Sir," Ethan whispered. Is it really you?" Brandon's eyes softened with reluctant recognition. "Hello, Gunny." Brooke blinked. "Gunny." He was addressing a gunnery sergeant like an equal now with a familiarity that didn't make sense. Ethan stepped closer, voice shaking. "Your arm, let me see it." "It's just ink, Gunny," Brandon said quietly. But Ethan didn't listen. His hands reached out not to restrain but with reverence as Brandon slowly lifted his sleeve again. The full tattoo came into view. The serpent coiled over the K-bar. The script, Fallujah's 05, the faintly etched number alongside it. Ethan's breath collapsed into a hoarse whisper. Reaper 6. Brooke's entire body went still. Reaper 6. She had heard that name once, an old whispered legend among Marines who had served in the bloodiest years of Iraq. A nameless Navy corpsman rumored to have saved 11 Marines in Fallujah during an ambush that should have wiped out an entire squad. A ghost-like figure who appeared in the darkest moments and disappeared before anyone could thank him. A man believed dead. Or retired. Or simply a myth older Marines told around campfires to remind the young what heroism looked like. Brooke had always assumed it was just that, a story. But now she turned to Brandon, heart pounding. You're not saying Ethan didn't let her finish." He snapped a rigid attention spine straight as a rifle barrel, as if saluting a superior officer. "Sir," he said, voice breaking with respect. "We thought you were gone." Brandon shook his head slowly. "I'm not anyone special anymore. I'm just here for my daughters." Ella peeked out from behind him. "Daddy." "Why is the man crying?" Ethan wiped his eyes quickly. "Because I owe your father my life, little one." Brooke's hands went cold. She had almost detained this man, almost called MPs on him, almost dragged a legend, someone who had bled for Marines away from his daughter's graduation. Shame crept up her spine like ice water. "Mr. Tate," she whispered, voice cracking. "I didn't know." Brandon offered a small, forgiving smile. "You were doing your job, Captain." But before Brooke could respond, radios crackled across the parade deck. Boots thundered toward them, and over the rising hush of the crowd came the unmistakable roar of a command vehicle pulling up nearby. Whatever was coming next would change everything again. Gunnery Sergeant Ethan Bowen hadn't moved this fast in years. His knees weren't what they used to be, and his back still ached every morning from shrapnel he never talked about. But when he caught sight of the tattoo, that tattoo, everything inside him snapped back into the fierce, urgent focus of a Marine in combat. The serpent, the K-bar, the faint marking of 6. It couldn't be. It shouldn't be. But it was. He pushed through a cluster of families, ignoring the annoyed murmurs, ignoring the stares. None of it mattered. The world had narrowed to one single impossible truth. Reaper 6 was standing on his parade deck, the corpsman who should have been dead, the ghost who saved his life, the man no one could ever forget. Yet there he stood, hair-long, demeanor-soft daughters clinging to him like sunbeams, and Ethan felt the ground tilt under him. By the time he reached Brandon Tate, his throat had gone dry. "Sir?" Ethan whispered, stopping short as if approaching sacred ground. Is it really you?" Brandon looked at him, not with pride, not with embarrassment, but with the quiet resignation of someone who had run from recognition for a very long time. "Hello, Gunny," he said gently, a greeting that cut Ethan straight to the bone. Captain Brooke Evans stared in stunned confusion. Sir Gunny was calling him Sir Nothing made sense anymore. Ethan had to steady himself before speaking again. "Your arm, let me see it." Brandon didn't want to. He truly didn't. But he slowly rolled the sleeve up, revealing the full emblem in the morning sun. Ethan's breath hitched. "Reaper 6, he murmured, voice trembling. "My God, I thought you were killed in the blast." Families nearby tensed, suddenly aware that something monumental was happening. The twins looked from their father to the trembling gunnery sergeant. Ella whispered, "Daddy saved him." Ethan nodded, tears welling. He saved all of us. Brooke stepped closer, her voice cracking between disbelief and dawning horror. "Gunny, you're saying this man is Ethan didn't let her finish?" He snapped to attention, spine rigid, arms locked at his sides. His salute cut the air like a blade. Petty Officer Tate Corman, United States Navy, Reaper 6. Murmurs rippled through the watching families. Brooke felt her knees weaken. Reaper 6 wasn't a name. It was a legend, whispered in hushed voices in the smoke pits and barracks. A medic who had run back into an ambush 3 times to pull wounded Marines out of the kill zone. A man covered in blood, others' blood, who refused to leave until the last Marine was accounted for. A figure, half myth, half miracle. But no one ever knew his identity. He had vanished from all records. Some said he'd died. Some said he had been discharged quietly. Some said he never existed, just a story to inspire new recruits. But Ethan Bowen, who had been 26 at the time of Fallujah, knew the truth, because he had watched Reaper 6 drag him out of a burning Humvee minutes before it exploded. "Sir," Ethan whispered through a tight throat, "why didn't you tell anyone you were alive?" Brandon rested a hand on Emma's shoulder. "I didn't want the girls growing up in the shadow of my past." Ethan swallowed hard, emotion threatening to spill over. "You don't understand. Every Marine who survived that day, every one of us, we've been carrying your memory, like a miracle we never deserved." Brandon responded with the softest apology. "I'm glad you made it home, Gunny." Brooke stood frozen, guilt burning through her like acid. She had treated this man, this hero, as if he were some threat. She'd humiliated him in front of his own daughters. Her stomach twisted painfully. I didn't know," Brooke forced out. "I had no idea who you were. I was only Brandon," offered her a gentle, weary smile. "You were doing what Marines do, protect the people. No harm done." But his forgiveness only made her shame worse. Ethan collected himself and turned sharply toward the command post, his voice filled with urgency. "I need to notify Sergeant Major Brooks. This isn't just a recognition, this is a matter for command." Brooke blinked. "A matter for command?" Ethan nodded solemnly. "Captain, we don't just have a veteran here. We have a man whose actions changed the Corps, and he's been lost for 19 years. Without another word, Ethan took off, moving with a speed driven only by awe and duty. The moment he disappeared behind the bleachers, a strange stillness settled over the area. Families watched cautiously. Officers nearby exchanged worried glances. Something enormous was brewing, and everyone sensed it. Brooke remained rooted to the spot, wrestling with her own turmoil. She watched Brandon carefully. He didn't stand with swagger. He didn't bask in recognition. He simply rubbed Ella's back to calm her trembling and whispered something soft to Emma that made the girl nod bravely. This wasn't a hero seeking praise. This was a father trying to shield his children from pain. "Mr. Tate," Brooke said quietly, almost tenderly, "why didn't you tell me who you were?" Brandon chuckled softly, almost painfully. "You didn't ask who I was, Captain. You asked whether I belonged here." Brooke flinched. He wasn't wrong. Before she could speak again, the air shifted. A wave of tension moved through the Marines stationed at the gate. Boots straightened. Postures stiffened. Brooke followed their gaze. A black command SUV was speeding down the service lane, its lights flashing white, not red or blue, the kind of lights used only for high-ranking officers. Brandon closed his eyes. He had hoped it wouldn't come to this. Emma squeezed his hand. "Daddy, who's coming?" Brandon smiled softly. "Someone important," Ella whispered. "Because of your tattoo," Brandon nodded. "Yeah, because of that." The SUV screeched to a sharp stop near the parade deck. The door swung open, and Sergeant Major Trevon Brooks climbed out first, his face set in stone. Seconds later, Colonel Benjamin Irwin stepped out behind him, the sunlight catching the silver eagle pinned to his uniform. The crowd fell silent. Brooks' heart stuttered, and Brandon Tate stood still, not with fear, but with the quiet resignation of a man whose past had finally caught up with him. Whatever came next would change everything. The black command SUV had barely rolled to a stop before an almost reverent stillness rippled across the entire parade deck. It was the kind of silence that didn't come from fear, but from recognition, from respect. Colonel Benjamin Irwin stepped out first, tall and sharp as a drawn saber. His uniform was crisp metals, glinting beneath the morning sun. He carried himself like a man who had walked through fire and come out colder, wiser, and carved from iron. Behind him, Sergeant Major Trevon Brooks walked with heavy purpose, his eyes already locked on Brandon Tate. Families parted instinctively the way the sea parts for an incoming storm. Captain Brooke Evans felt her throat tighten. She had only seen the colonel this tense once during a live-fire accident years ago. But now his jaw was clenched, his stride urgent, his gaze unblinking. Something enormous, something bigger than any of them was unfolding. Brooks snapped to attention on instinct. "Sir?" Captain Evans reporting Colonel Irwin didn't slow, didn't look at her, didn't acknowledge her. He walked straight toward Brandon Tate. Her stomach dropped. Sergeant Major Brooks passed her next, his voice low and hushed. "Captain." "Step aside." She obeyed, instantly, her cheeks burning. Ethan Bowen, standing a few feet away, stiffened into his own salute as the colonel approached. His weathered face glowed with a mixture of awe and disbelief. Colonel Ethan breathed. "It's him. It's really him." Irwin didn't reply, but something flickered behind his eyes, recognition grief, and a weight so heavy it seemed to bend his shoulders for a fraction of a moment. Brandon stood completely still. Ella clung to his left hand, Emma to his right. He offered them a tiny smile, the same gentle reassurance he had always used on scraped knees, first-day jitters, nightmares every moment of fear since they were babies. "It's all right," he whispered. But he knew it wasn't. Not anymore. Sergeant Major Brooks reached him first. He stopped 2 feet away, then slowly, almost reverently removed his cover. His voice trembled in a way that no Marine under his command had ever heard. "Corpsman Tate," he whispered. "I never thought I'd see the day." Brooke Evans felt her breath catch. Corpsman, Navy medic. The legends were true. But hearing his title spoken aloud, she felt her face flush with shame. She had nearly detained him, nearly handcuffed him, nearly humiliated him in front of his daughters. Brandon dipped his head respectfully. "Sergeant Major, it's been a long time." "A lifetime," Brooks murmured, eyes glistening. "Too long." Then Colonel Irwin stepped forward, and the entire world seemed to tighten around them. The colonel studied him, not like an officer evaluating a subordinate, but like a man looking at a ghost he once mourned. "Petty Officer Brandon Tate," he said quietly. 19 years, and not a single damn day I thought you were alive." The twins stared at the colonel, confused. Emma whispered, "Daddy, he knows you." Brandon exhaled softly. "We served together. Long ago." Irwin's jaw flexed, his voice steadied into command tone, deep resonant, filled with conviction. "Sergeant Major, Gunny, listen carefully." He did not raise his voice, yet every Marine within 20 yards heard him. "What stands before you is not a civilian, not a janitor, not just a father." He paused. "This is the corpsman who pulled 11 Marines out of a collapsing hellhole during the Fallujah ambush, the one who ran back after the 3rd explosion, the one who should have died with the rest of us in that alley." Ethan Bowen swallowed hard, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. I told them you were alive, Ethan whispered. Told everyone. But no one believed me. Brandon gave him a small smile. You always did have more faith than the rest of us. The colonel inhaled deeply and painfully, as though pulling memories from a place he rarely touched. Reaper 6, he said slowly, firmly. You saved my Marines. You saved my men. You saved me. Gasps ripple through nearby families. Brooke's heart cracked. This wasn't just recognition. This was redemption. This was reverence. Daddy, Ella murmured. What's Reaper 6? Brandon crouched down so he could meet her eyes. His voice was steady, soft, but layered with years of unspoken truth. It was just a call sign, baby. Something they used to shout when I ran faster than I should have. Emma blinked. Like a superhero name, Brandon chuckled faintly. Not quite, sweetheart. But Ethan shook his head. No, miss. More than a superhero. Sergeant Major Brooks nodded solemnly. Your father was the man Marines prayed would show up when everything went to hell. And he always did. The twins stared at their father with widened eyes, pride blooming faster than understanding. Brooke Evans watched quietly, something aching deep inside her chest. But the colonel wasn't finished. He stepped even closer. So close, he stood just inches from Brandon. Corpsman Tate, he said, voice thickening. Why did you vanish? Why did you disappear without a word? Brandon looked down just for a moment. My girls needed a father more than the world needed another war story. The colonel closed his eyes. Sergeant Major Brooks swallowed hard. Ethan's shoulders trembled. No one argued with him. But Colonel Irwin straightened, regaining command posture. Sergeant Major, he instructed, inform the command tent we have a priority recognition case on site, and clear the front rows. Brooke blinked. The front rows, sir? That's for distinguished Captain Evans. Irwin cut in sharply. That man saved Marines under my command. He sits wherever I damn well put him. Brooke's face flushed, but she saluted sharply. Yes, sir. Brandon's eyes widened slightly. Colonel. That's not necessary. It is, Irwin said simply. Then the colonel leaned in, lowering his voice so only Brandon could hear. You hid long enough. Today your daughters will know exactly who their father is. Brandon's eyes glistened, not with pride, but with humility. Deep, quiet, painful humility. He had spent 19 years avoiding the spotlight, and now the entire Marine Corps was moving to put him at the center of it. He squeezed Emma and Ella's hands, grounding himself. All right, he whispered. One day won't hurt. Colonel Irwin nodded once. It was decided. And for the first time in nearly 2 decades, the Corps was preparing to honor a ghost who had finally stepped into the light. The parade deck moments ago filled with cheerful anticipation now vibrated with a quiet electricity. Rows of Marines stood straighter. Families hushed their children. Even the summer breeze seemed to hold its breath as the commanders closed in around Brandon Tate. Only 2 people on the field did not understand what was happening, Emma and Ella Tate, holding their father's hand so tightly their knuckles whitened, and Captain Brooke Evans, whose shame thickened with every passing second. Colonel Irwin's voice had barely faded when Brooke found herself stepping forward despite herself, unable to stay silent. Sir, she said quietly with respect. I didn't know who he was. I was only doing my Irwin cut his gaze to her sharp as a blade. No one is questioning your duty, Captain. But you will stand down. Brooke swallowed hard and nodded. Aye, sir. But the damage was done. The families around them now watched her with a mixture of curiosity and judgment. Some whispered, some frowned. Others leaned close to each other, asking the question no one dared say aloud. How could she not know? How could she treat him that way? She felt every whisper like a sting, but she kept her posture rigid. Marines didn't crumble. Brandon turned to his daughters, lowering himself to their eye level. "Hey," he murmured, softly brushing a tear from Ella's cheek. "Remember what I told you? Everything's okay." "Daddy." Emma sniffed. "Are you in trouble?" He smiled sadly. "No, sweetheart. People are just surprised to see me. That's all." "But why?" Ella asked. "Because of your tattoo," Brandon hesitated. "Something like that." Before he could explain further, the sharp clack of boots echoed behind them louder than before. Military police. Two of them marched toward the gathering. Brooke's eyes widened. "Sir, MPs weren't called by me. They're not here for him," Sergeant Major Brooks said firmly. "They're here for the crowd control." But the families didn't know that. The presence of MPs sent a ripple of panic through the onlookers. A woman gasped. "Are they arresting him?" A man muttered. "This is ridiculous." Another whispered angrily. "He has kids. Leave the man alone." Brandon stood and raised his hand slightly, not in surrender, but in calm reassurance to the crowd. "It's all right," he called out softly. "No one's in trouble." But his gentleness didn't ease the tension. The MPs stopped several feet away, awaiting orders. Their eyes flicked between Brandon, the colonel, and Captain Evans. Unsure, uncertain. Brooke felt her heartbeat hammering in her chest. Was this what she caused? A father surrounded, children frightened, Marines on edge, a legend treated like a trespasser. She opened her mouth, but the colonel lifted a hand. "Captain," he said evenly, "fall back with the MPs. It wasn't a reprimand. It wasn't an order meant to humiliate. It was simply a wall placed between her and the man she had misjudged." Brooke obeyed, stepping back. But the shame stayed glued to her skin. Ethan Bowen stepped beside Brandon now like a protective sentinel. "Sir," he murmured, "just want you to know I'm right here beside you, whatever comes next." Brandon nodded gratefully. "I know, Gunny. And if anyone tries to put cuffs on you, no one will," Brandon said calmly. This isn't that kind of moment. But the tension said otherwise. And then one voice cut through the air like thunder. "What is the meaning of this?" A grandmother in the front row had finally lost patience. She stood arms crossed, glaring at the officers. "That man is here to see his daughters graduate. Shame on all of you." The crowd stirred, pride swelling like a wave. "Yeah," another voice chimed in. "He's done nothing wrong." Brooke felt a pit forming in her stomach. This wasn't just a misunderstanding anymore. This was a scene. A Marine lieutenant stepped forward, hands up. "Ma'am, please everyone stay calm. No one is under arrest." But the murmurs continued. Brandon could feel his daughters trembling. He squeezed their hands and whispered, "Stay right here. Don't be scared." Then, with the patience of a man who had endured far worse storms, he looked at Brooke and spoke quietly, but loud enough the nearby families heard Captain Evans. She stepped closer, stiff and uncertain. "Yes." "Sir, let them know everything's fine. You have the uniform. They'll listen to you. It wasn't a command. It wasn't a shaming. It was mercy." Brooke swallowed hard. Then she turned to the crowd and raised her voice. "Everyone stand down. This man is not a threat. He's a Navy corpsman, a veteran, a decorated one." Her voice wavered, but she continued. "He has every right to be here." A hush fell. Some people nodded. Some whispered. Others clutched their hearts, softening instantly. But then she added the words that shifted the entire atmosphere. "He's Reaper 6. A collective gasp swept across the parade deck. A few older Marines in the audience straightened, eyes widening in recognition. One even saluted instinctively. Brooke looked back at Brandon, eyes shimmering with apology. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I'm truly sorry." Brandon's face remained gentle. "It's all right. Really." But Brooke shook her head. No, I judged you by your shirt. Your hair, not who you were. I let a procedure hide the person standing in front of me. Brandon didn't respond, not because he dismissed her apology, but because something else shifted in the air. The colonel stepped closer. The graduation band had gone silent. The recruits in formation stood rigid, sensing something historic. Even the seagulls circling overhead seemed to quiet. Colonel Irwin's voice boomed, "Move the families aside. Make a path." 2 Marines gently parted the crowd. The colonel gestured to Brandon and his daughters. "Corman Tate, please step forward." Brandon exhaled, collected himself, and took a single step. Emma and Ella moved with him. Brooke watched with a swelling in her chest. She didn't expect pride, guilt, awe, all tangled into one. Whatever was about to happen would transform this entire ceremony. And as Brandon moved toward the center of the deck, Brooke realized this wasn't the moment that exposed him. This was the moment the Marine Corps reclaimed him. The path the Marines cleared cut straight through the heart of the parade deck, like a red carpet carved out of discipline and reverence. Families shuffled aside, murmuring, craning their necks. Even the recruits in formation subtly shifted their eyes toward the commotion, though their bodies stayed locked in rigid stillness. At the end of that path stood Colonel Benjamin Irwin. Boots planted firmly, shoulders squared, the South Carolina sunlight turning the silver eagle on his chest into a beacon. Beside him, Sergeant Major Trevon Brooks stood as immovable as a monument. It wasn't just an entrance, it was an acknowledgement, a recognition long overdue. And at the other end of that path stood a quiet father in an olive work shirt holding the hands of his 2 terrified daughters. Brandon Tate did not move at first, not out of fear, not out of shame, but out of humility so profound it made the moment feel heavier than steel. "Daddy," Emma whispered, voice trembling. "Do we have to go up there?" Brandon squeezed her hand gently. "Only if you're beside me. Both of you." Ella nodded, though her lip quivered. When he finally stepped forward, he walked slowly measured steps, each one carrying 19 years of silence, humility, and unspoken ghosts. The crowd parted with a reverent hush. Some Marines saluted him without fully understanding why. Others placed hands over their hearts instinctively. Captain Brooke Evans watched from the side, her face pale, her chest tight. She had never felt so small, so exposed. And watching Brandon walk forward with his daughters at his sides, she wished she could disappear entirely. The man she had questioned, the man she nearly detained, the man she misjudged based on a shirt, a misplaced step, and her own need for control. He now walked toward the colonel like someone returning home after a lifetime away. When Brandon reached them, Colonel Irwin took one step forward, just one. But it carried the weight of every Marine he had ever commanded. For a long moment, neither man spoke. The colonel stared at Brandon with a mixture of disbelief, awe, and something else, grief, that had been tucked deep beneath medals and command decisions. Then, with slow, deliberate motion, Colonel Irwin removed his cover. Sergeant Major Brooks followed. Ethan Bowen, standing behind them, did the same. And then the colonel said softly, "Corman Tate. Welcome back." A tremor passed through Brandon's jaw. He shook his head lightly. "I never left, sir. Just lived quietly." The colonel nodded, eyes shining. "You earned that right, but you also earned our respect. And today the Corps returns it." He turned to the parade deck, and what he said next was not quiet. It thundered. Marines, every recruit, snapped to attention at once. Every officer halted. Every family went silent. Colonel Irwin's voice carried across the entire base, powerful, resonant, impossible to ignore. "Before you stands a man who has saved more Marines than any medic I have served with in my 30 years in uniform." The crowd gasped in unison. Brandon's daughter stared up at him with wide eyes. The colonel continued. During the Fallujah ambush of 2005, when the enemy surrounded our men, when the alley collapsed from the third blast, when smoke and fire swallowed that street, this Corman. He paused, swallowing emotion, ran back into the flames 3 times. Alone, unarmed. He dragged out 11 Marines, many of whom would not be here today without him. Ethan Bowen stared at the ground, fighting tears. The colonel's voice deepened. And when the evacuation finally came, when the last Marine was safe, Corman Tate refused treatment until everyone else was accounted for. Brandon said nothing, face still, eyes distant, as if reliving the moment he'd buried for nearly 2 decades. Irwin turned to him, fierce pride in his voice. Some men earn medals. Some earn legends. He pointed at Brandon's tattoo. Reaper 6 earned both. A wave of shock and reverence washed through the crowd. Emma squeezed her father's fingers. Daddy, you saved all those people. Brandon lowered his eyes to hers, voice soft and heavy. I did what anyone else would do. But the colonel shook his head. No, only you did it. Brooke Evans felt her knees weaken. She had studied Marine Corps history. She knew the stories whispered about Reaper 6, the ghost-like medic who rose out of smoke like an angel of mercy. She had always assumed he was myth, a campfire tale. But he was real. He was standing right there, and she had interrogated him like a trespasser. Her chest ached. Sergeant Major Brooke stepped forward, now clearing his throat. Sir, with your permission, should we proceed with formal recognition? The colonel nodded. Yes, the recruits deserve to know the legacy they inherit. Brandon immediately shook his head. No. Please. My girls, this day is for them, not me. Emma tugged on his sleeve. Daddy, can it be for all of us? Ella whispered. We want people to know who you are. Brandon's breath broke just a fraction. The colonel placed a firm hand on his shoulder. Corman Tate, let us honor you, not for glory, but for truth. Silence fell. Then finally, reluctantly, Brandon gave a small nod. The colonel turned to the waiting Marines. Open the front seating. Put chairs for Corman Tate and his daughters. 2 corporals sprinted to maneuver chairs normally reserved for distinguished visitors. Families stared disbelief, turning slowly into emotional awe. A janitor, a father who blended into crowds, a man no one noticed for years, now seated at the place of honor, and not a soul questioned it. As Brandon and his daughters were guided to the front, the entire formation of new Marines, hundreds of them, shifted unconsciously, their posture sharpening respect, radiating through them like a wave. Brooke Evans watched all of it with a tight throat and heavy heart. She stepped closer, not daring to meet his eyes, then stopped, saluted him slowly, and whispered, so only he could hear, Sir. I am so sorry. Brandon looked at her with the same softness he had shown since the beginning. You don't need to apologize, Captain. You were doing your job. But Brooke shook her head. Her voice wavered. I forgot to see the man before the uniform. Brandon smiled, sad, kind, forgiving. It happens to all of us. As he sat between his daughters, the parade deck transformed. This was no longer a graduation ceremony. It was a homecoming for a hero who never asked to be one. The bleachers had never been so silent. Not during moments of prayer, not during the national anthem, not even during final roll call. It was a silence born from awe, pure, breath-held, heart-tight awe, as Brandon Tate took his seat beside his daughters in the front row. Emma clung to his left arm, Ella to his right. Their tiny frames sat in chairs far too ceremonial for children, but no one questioned it. To the Marine Corps, they were the daughters of a legend, and legends did not sit in the back. The graduation band paused their warm-up. New Marines standing at rigid attention across the parade deck shifted, subtly stealing glances at the quiet man with long hair in an olive shirt. The whispers began like wind rustling grass. "That's him, Reaper 6. I thought he died. He looks so normal. He saved 11 Marines 11. But no whisper carried more weight than the one from the old veteran in the second row, leaning on a cane, voice gravelly with age. "I was there," he murmured. "Fallujah. We used to pray that man would show up, and he always did." His granddaughter gasped. "Grandpa, you saw him." The old man's eyes glistened. "No, nobody ever saw him. That's what made him a ghost." The word hung in the air. A ghost. A myth. A legend reborn in flesh. Colonel Benjamin Irwin turned toward the parade formation, lifting the microphone. His voice carried with controlled power. "Marines, this ceremony will continue as planned." He paused, letting that calm wash over the deck. But first he added, "You deserve to know the type of courage that built the eagle globe and anchor you now wear." A ripple spread through the formation. He gestured toward Brandon. "Rise, Corpsman Tate." Brandon did not want the spotlight. Every instinct told him to stay low, remain unseen. But he felt Emma squeeze his hand silently, urging him forward. Ella nodded at him, her big eyes shining with pride. So he rose. Slowly, quietly, with humility so deep it tugged at the hearts of everyone watching. Colonel Irwin faced the recruits. In every generation of Marines there are warriors whose actions shape the very soul of the Corps. 19 years ago in the burning alleys of Fallujah, one such warrior emerged. The colonel's voice stiffened. He carried no rifle. He wore a cross on his chest, and his only duty was to save lives. He pointed to Brandon. "That man is standing before you." Gasps, tears, shudders. Even the toughest Marines felt history brushing against them. Sergeant Major Brooks stepped forward, voice deep. "Marines on my command," and then it happened. A sound like thunder rolled across the deck as hundreds of boots snapped together in unison. The entire battalion lifted their arms in perfect precision and saluted him. Not the colonel, not the sergeant major. Him, the forgotten medic, the janitor father. Reaper 6. The salute was crisp, powerful, almost holy. Emma's mouth dropped open. "Daddy, they're saluting you," Ella whispered. Why, Brandon's throat tightened. He hadn't cried in years, he'd buried too much for too long, but something in this moment cracked open inside him. He knelt to his daughters, voice shaking. "They're not saluting me, sweetheart. They're saluting what we all fought for, what we lost, what we tried to save." But Brooke Evans, standing nearby, eyes shining with emotion, knew that wasn't the whole truth. He was a symbol, a protector, a man who had walked through fire and carried others out on his back. And Marines saluted him because they recognized one of their own, perhaps the bravest among them. Ethan Bowen stepped beside the colonel, now standing stiff as a statue. "Sir," he said quietly, "this is long overdue." Colonel Irwin nodded. "Too long." Brandon stood fully facing the battalion. He gave a salute, slow, meaningful, deeply respectful. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't loud. It was the quiet salute of a man who had carried the weight of too many memories. The recruits dropped their salutes in perfect unison. Silence. Then Colonel Irwin spoke again, voice cracking. "For years we believed Corpsman Tate had died in the blast that took the rest of Alpha Squad. We honored his memory. We told his story. But today, we honor the man himself." He stepped closer to Brandon. "On behalf of the United States Marine Corps." "Welcome home," Brandon bowed his head. "Thank you." "Sir." Brooke Evans finally stepped forward, heart pounding. She faced Brandon not as an officer correcting a civilian, but as a Marine humbled by a truth she had overlooked. "Petty Officer Tate," she said softly, "I misjudged you, and I am deeply sorry." Her voice wavered. I saw a man out of place. I saw someone who looked tired, worn, different from everyone else. I didn't see the courage behind your eyes." Brandon looked at her with kindness, not pity, not superiority, only kindness. "You followed protocol, Captain. That's what keeps people safe." "No," she whispered, eyes wet. "Protocol didn't fail today. I did. I judged you by your appearance, not by your heart." Brandon offered a quiet smile. "Then learn from it. That's what makes a good Marine." Brooke swallowed hard. "That's what makes a good person," she corrected softly. The colonel cleared his throat, placing a hand on Brooke's shoulder, firm, encouraging. "This is how Marines grow," he said. Through humility. Once Brandon and the girls sat again, the colonel turned back to the recruits. "Let the ceremony begin." The band struck its first note. The parade commander barked orders. The recruits marched forward for their final recognition. But even as the graduation resumed, every eye kept drifting to the quiet man in the front row. The ghost who wasn't a ghost. The legend who had returned. The father who simply wanted to see his daughters graduate. And though none of them knew it yet, this salute was only the beginning. The graduation ceremony concluded under a sky washed in gold, the kind of warm Carolina light that softened even the hardest faces. As the final notes of the Marine Corps hymn faded, the newly minted Marines threw their covers in the air, cheering, crying, embracing one another. Pride carried across the parade deck like a wave. But at the front row, where true history had quietly unfolded, Brandon Tate remained seated for a long moment, exhaling slowly, as if releasing 19 years of tightly held breath. Emma and Ella climbed onto his lap without asking, wrapping their arms around him. Their tiny hands clutched his shirt, their faces pressed against his chest. "You okay, Daddy?" Emma whispered. "Yeah," Brandon murmured, kissing the top of her head. "Just a lot to take in." Ella leaned back to study him. "Did you really save 11 people?" Brandon hesitated. "I tried my best. But they said you were a hero," she added, her eyes wide. He cupped her cheek gently. "Sweetheart, being a hero doesn't mean being fearless or strong. It means doing what's right even when you're scared." Emma frowned thoughtfully. "Were you scared back then?" Brandon's eyes clouded, the ghosts flickering through them. Every second. The girls hugged him harder, as if shielding him from memories that had lived in shadows too long. While families gathered for photos, Captain Brooke Evans stood several yards away, unable to move. The guilt sat like a heavy pack strapped across her shoulders. She had always prided herself on discipline, intuition, fairness, but today she had seen the limits of her own vision. She hadn't seen the man, only the rule broken, only the hair too long, only the shirt too plain. What she had missed was everything. It took all her courage to walk toward him now. Each step felt heavier than the last. When she reached him, she stood at attention. Rigid, formal voice, steady but trembling beneath the surface. "Petty Officer Tate," she began softly. "May I speak with you?" Brandon looked up, his expression kind, but curious. He shifted his daughters gently aside so he could rise to his feet. "You don't have to be so formal, Captain," he said. Brooke swallowed. "I do, because I owe you something." The girls watched intently, curious, protective. Brooke lowered her voice. "I misjudged you. I let training overshadow humanity. I treated you as a threat when you were only a father." Brandon nodded slowly. "Being cautious is part of the job." "No," she insisted. "Caution is one thing, pride is another. And I let pride blind me." Her voice cracked. "I'm truly sorry." Brandon studied her face, a face that had been severe hours ago but now held cracks of vulnerability. He saw sincerity, regret, the humility of someone strong enough to admit she failed. He offered his hand. I forgive you." She blinked rapidly, taken aback. Just like that. He shrugged lightly. Holding anger weighs a person down. And I've carried enough weight in my life. Brooke let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She took his hand, gently shaking it with quiet gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered. Emma tugged Brooke's sleeve timidly. "It's okay, Captain. Daddy says good people make mistakes too." Ella nodded sagely. "He says it's how you fix them that matters." Brooke smiled through her emotion. "Your father is a wise man," Brandon chuckled. "Don't give me too much credit." But Brooke shook her head, sincerity settling deep in her voice. "Sir, what you did today, your grace, your humility taught me more than any leadership course ever did." He gave her a soft, fatherly look. "All of us are learning, Captain. Even me." Nearby, Sergeant Major Trevon Brooks and Gunnery Sergeant Ethan Bowen discussed plans with Colonel Irwin. Their expressions were stern, but their eyes were warm. When Brandon approached, all three men turned with immediate respect. Irwin spoke first. "Corpsman Tate, we'd like to invite you and your daughters to the post-graduation reception. The officers would like to meet you. Properly this time." Brandon shook his head. "Sir, that's not necessary." Ethan stepped forward. "It is. Marines deserve the chance to thank the man who carried them on his back." Emma whispered to her sister. "Daddy carried people on his back." Ella whispered back. "Probably like piggyback, but scary." Brandon pinched the bridge of his nose, embarrassed. "Gunny." But Irwin spoke before Brandon could protest further. "You can't keep running from it, son. You spent 19 years hiding from the Corps. Let us spend one afternoon honoring you." Brandon hesitated, then nodded. "All right, but only if Emma and Ella come with me." The colonel smiled. Wouldn't have it any other way. The reception hall buzzed with life officers, enlisted Marines, families, old veterans. But when Brandon stepped inside, the room seemed to shift. People straightened. Conversations quieted. A slow ripple of recognition passed through the ranks. Some Marines saluted immediately. Others placed hands over their hearts. A few simply stared, unsure whether they were looking at a man or a legend stepped out of a story. Brandon felt overwhelmed. His daughters sensed it and held tighter to his sides. But kindness followed him wherever he walked. A lieutenant with a prosthetic leg approached. "Sir, I don't know if you remember me. 2nd Battalion, Platoon 2030. Brandon paused. "Ramirez," the young officer's eyes filled. "They told us you died. I wouldn't be here if you hadn't dragged me out." Brandon swallowed hard. "I remember." Another Marine stepped forward, a woman with streaks of gray in her hair. "Corpsman Tate. You saved my husband. He passed years later, but he always spoke of you. He said you were the only reason he came home long enough to meet our daughter." She choked up. "Thank you." Brandon reached for her hand gently. He was brave. "I just did my part." Emma leaned toward Ella. "Daddy does a lot of parts. Huge parts," Ella whispered. Near the end of the gathering, Captain Brooke Evans approached one last time, this time not in guilt, but in reverence. "Corpsman," she said softly, "would you allow me a request?" Brandon nodded. "What is it?" She inhaled. "Teach me how to see people the way you do." He smiled, slow, warm, deeply human. "It begins with looking past the uniform." Brooke exhaled, feeling something inside her shift, a lesson she would never forget. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the barracks and the celebration wound down, Brandon stepped outside with Emma and Ella. The air smelled like salt and pine. The girls hugged him from each side. Daddy Emma whispered, "Are you happy?" Brandon looked toward the horizon, his voice soft but certain. for the first time in a long time. Yes. Ella rested her head on his arm. We're proud of you. He kissed their foreheads. I'm proud of you. And as they walked toward the parking lot hand in hand, something subtle but powerful settled inside him. A sense of healing, a sense of belonging, a sense of forgiveness, not from others, but from himself. And tomorrow, for the first time in 19 years, he would wake up without feeling the need to hide. The sun dipped low over Paris Island, casting long amber streaks across the water, and the parade ground that only hours earlier had vibrated with ceremony and revelation. Now the base felt quiet, wrapped in the gentle hush that follows a storm, except this storm had brought healing instead of destruction. Brandon Tate walked slowly toward the parking lot with Emma on his left, Ella on his right, each girl swinging his arms playfully, as if trying to lift the weight he had carried for 19 years. And somehow, for the first time in a long time, he felt light enough to let them. The reception had dwindled into small clusters of Marines, talking softly, older veterans, trading stories, officers recounting the moment they realized Reaper 6 was alive and standing in their midst. A few still stole glances at him as he passed, not out of curiosity, but out of respect. A gentle nod, a hand pressed over a heart, a subtle bow of the head. But no one disturbed him. Not anymore. Colonel Irwin had insisted on announcing to every officer present, today is not about protocol. Today is about honoring a man who never asked for honor. And everyone listened. As they reached the edge of the parking lot, a familiar voice called after him. Corpsman Tate Brandon turned. Sergeant Major Trevon Brooks approached with a purposeful stride, accompanied by Gunnery Sergeant Ethan Bowen, who still looked as though he couldn't fully believe the day's events weren't just a dream. Brooks stopped in front of Brandon, raising a hand, not in salute, but in a gesture of grounded brotherly respect. "You leaving without saying goodbye?" the sergeant major asked. Brandon smiled. "Didn't want to pull anyone away from the celebration." Ethan shook his head. "Sir, after what happened today, the whole base is talking about this, like it was a once-in-a-generation moment." "You think anyone left early?" Ella leaned toward Emma. "I think we made everyone stay late." Emma nodded solemnly. "We're important." Brooks chuckled. "You two definitely are." Then his tone softened as he looked at Brandon. "Colonel Irwin wanted me to ask if you'd be willing to speak to the corpsman course sometime. Not about combat, just about carrying yourself the way you do. About humility." Brandon shifted uncomfortably. "I'm not a speaker." "You're not," Brooks agreed. "You're better," Ethan added. "You speak by living. That's rarer than any lecture." Brandon's throat tightened. "I'll think about it." Brooks nodded, satisfied. Then he reached into his uniform pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "Sir, this was found in archived possessions that were believed to be yours. It was never claimed. The colonel wanted you to have it back." Brandon hesitated before opening the box. Inside lay a simple Navy Corpsman insignia pin, worn at the edges, slightly bent, but unmistakably his. For a moment the world blurred around him. He had lost this during the Fallujah evacuation, believing it buried under rubble or taken by flames. He hadn't thought about it in years. Seeing it again felt like touching a chapter of his life he never thought he would revisit. Emma whispered, "Daddy." "It's pretty." Ella added, "Can we keep it?" Brandon laughed softly. "Maybe one day. But for now, it's a reminder." Ethan's eyes softened. "Of who you are." Brandon shook his head gently. "Of who I was, and who I chose to become." Brooks placed a steady hand on his shoulder. "We're glad you chose to come back today, even if it was by accident." Brandon gave a quiet, genuine smile. "Me too." With one last respectful nod, the two Marines turned and walked back toward the reception hall, older, steadier, and touched by a day they would recount for the rest of their lives. As Brandon and the girls approached their car, the last person he expected stepped into view from behind a lamppost. Captain Brooke Evans. Her posture was no longer rigid. Her arms hung loosely at her sides. Her expression was soft, vulnerable in a way he hadn't seen before. "Mr. Tate," she said gently. He tilted his head. "Captain." Brooke hesitated before speaking, as though choosing her words with the precision she wished she'd used earlier that morning. "I just wanted to say thank you for what Brandon asked, for teaching me a lesson I didn't know I needed," she replied. "About humility, about seeing people, about slowing down long enough to understand before reacting." She glanced at the girls. Her voice softened further. "And thank you for forgiving me today. Most people wouldn't have." Brandon shrugged lightly. "Most people haven't walked in my boots, and I haven't walked in yours." Brooke's eyes glistened. "If you ever need anything on this base, you have my respect." He nodded. "Thank you, Captain. That means something." She returned his nod, then stepped back with a deep, respectful salute. Not for Reaper 6, not for the call sign, for the man. Brandon returned it slowly. She smiled faintly and walked away, leaving him with a sense of closure neither of them expected. As he buckled the girls into the truck, Emma piped up. "Daddy today was crazy." Ella nodded. "Super crazy." Brandon laughed. "The good kind of crazy." They considered it. Emma shrugged. "The kind that makes you happy." Ella added, "The kind you remember forever." He kissed each girl's forehead. "Then I guess it was a good day." When he climbed into the driver's seat and started the engine, he expected old feelings, shame weight, dread to creep back in. But they didn't. Instead, he felt something new blooming in his chest. Not pride, not ego, not the spotlight he had avoided for so long. Peace. A peace earned not from medals or recognition, but from the simple truth that he no longer needed to hide. As he pulled out of the parking lot, the girls singing childish songs in the back seat, Brandon glanced once more at the base through the rearview mirror. The parade deck glowed under the fading light. The flags fluttered, and somewhere inside, Marines still whispered the name they never thought they'd see again. But Brandon whispered something else, almost to himself, almost to the ghosts of his past. It's time to live again. And with that, the quiet hero began a new beginning, one not written in combat or sacrifice, but in forgiveness, healing, and the 2 daughters who gave him the courage to stop running. Before we close, we'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Share your city, your state, or even your country. In the comments, our community spans the world, and your voice truly matters here. If this story touched your heart, inspired you, or reminded you of someone you love, please consider subscribing to our channel. It helps us continue creating meaningful, uplifting stories that celebrate kindness, courage, and the quiet heroes among us. From the bottom of our hearts, thank you for spending your time with us today. Your presence means more than you know, and we hope this story stays with you long after the video ends.